Uh, Hello, Robert. Thank you very much for your great support. And then, if you are ready, you can start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. So let me just see if I can get my PowerPoint here. Okay, so is that showing up on your screen? Do you see the screen?
Yes, we can see. We can see.
I took this picture of your university 5 or 6 years ago when I gave a talk there. My wife calls Istanbul her favorite city in the world to visit. We've really enjoyed the times that we've gone to your country.
Bob, I would like to remind you, because you know Istanbul University split the two universities. Right now we are the Istanbul University Cerrahpaşa. I would like to remind you. Thank you.
Oh, great, thank you. You know, one of the wonderful things that you do in Turkey is how you support your college students. In the United States, it's very expensive to attend college. Some universities have a lot of money. For example, Harvard has a lot of money to help students attend, but it is about $72,000 a year to attend. But not every university can do that. So I really admire what you've done in your country to help all students to attend schools. In an earlier visit, we were in Eskişehir, excuse my poor pronunciation, and students were protesting a small increase in tuition. And I later learned that actually they stopped charging tuition. So congratulations to your country for being so committed. So there was a magazine cover about 2 years ago with the New Yorker, and it reminded me of Flip Classroom, because you can see in this that some items are upside down, some are the right way, etc. So today, we'll talk about a number of things. The impact of COVID-19 here has influenced a lot of distance learning, much more so than we had. I'll give you a very brief history about how all this started and what we call flippers, a little how-to in the learning glass. And then I'll provide later on, when you probably start to get bored of hearing me, a couple of short video clips on some things that we were doing over here. So for many centuries, this is pretty much how a college classroom looked. I don't know what date this is of this photograph, but it's probably in the 1940s or early 1950s. You have a professor up in the front of the room, and you have students in classroom where they were absorbing knowledge of this very learned person in the front. Now, some forms of education work very well for certain students and other forms for others. There's no one format that works well for every single student. So it's nice when schools can accommodate a mix of things. So the majority of the US universities have had to deal with COVID-19. So a lot of them sent students home back in March. I don't know if it's 100%, but pretty close. So the US was a little slow in responding to it. And then in August, schools were getting ready to open up again for the fall. A lot of the universities in the South did that, and they ended up having a huge number of students test positive. So they had to slow things down. Oops, sorry. Things bounced a little forward here. Ohio State University is a very large school, and they suspended 228 students for violating the COVID policies, which would include wearing masks when you're close to other people, or not staying about 2 meters away from people if you didn't have a mask. Boston University, one of my alma maters, suspended partying students, students who got together in groups of more than 10. North Carolina State ended up having to send all students home when they had more than 1,000 students test positive. Now, it was 2 weeks ago when I discovered that there were more than 30,000 cases, positive cases at 750 colleges. That number has gone up since then. Okay. I don't expect you to be able to read these newspaper articles, but I can just mention that at Harvard, 20% of the first-year students decided not to come. They asked to be deferred for a year. There's usually a few percentage that do that. So 20 was quite a bit. They allowed about 40% of the undergraduates to come on campus. They all had to be tested on arrival, and they have to be tested twice weekly. Many of them are viewing, or most of them are viewing their courses from the residential halls. They don't have live classrooms. A professor can go into a classroom and use that facility to teach, but it's broadcast, so there are no students there. And in the residential halls, all students have a single classroom. They equipped all the rooms with refrigerators and microwaves so the students could feed themselves. Massachusetts, MIT, down the street, they also had 8% deferred, which was low compared to some of the other schools. Williams College is also in Massachusetts, wonderful school, and they had 90 students decide it's a small school, take a gap year. And you can see some of the other schools are putting things online, not having students on campus. There's a small campus in the town that I live, and everything is remote for them. So here, UMass means the University of Massachusetts, and they had decided that the only students who would come to campus were those whose instruction had to happen live. For example, if you had students in a chemistry class, it's hard to conduct experiments online, so those students could come. They normally have 30,000 students there, but only 740 were allowed to be on campus, so it's a tiny amount. Students who decided to come back to the area where the university is and live off campus, they're denied access to campus facilities, libraries, labs, gyms, and et cetera. And also they can't use the meal plan. So here you can read the big piece of the article, Colleges Reversing Course on Reopening. As I mentioned before, when the schools in August were talking about things, here are just a small sample of universities that decided to not have students come back after they originally said they were going to come back. This gives an example of various parts of the US, East Coast, Central country, West Coast, and et cetera. So that had an impact, of course, on distance learning, where we had many professors who had never taught a distance learning class. And when they started doing this in March, they were uncomfortable. It happened very quickly. There was just a few days notice about this happening. Some faculty members had not used programs such as Zoom or Google Meet and et cetera. So students were telling me that they could see the faculty sort of stumbling a little bit at first, and the students were helping them to get going. So we describe, some of the theorists described flipped classrooms as a student-centric pedagogy in which the lecture is moved to an online environment and class time is engaging in active forms of learning. So in other words, the students, as you know, would flip, they watch a recording of the professor's lecture before class. They go into the classroom. They're split up in groups in most cases. They discuss it with their classmates. The professor walks around the room, listening, and then creates a lecture for the rest of the class based on what the professor hears the students say and what they understand and don't understand. So here's a list of, just a very small list of some of the schools in the United States, from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, I mentioned, Boston University, Bentley. These are all mostly the Northeast and Yale. And we go down the East Coast, Virginia Tech in Pennsylvania. And we go out in California. So we're down the South, East Coast. It's gone across the whole country. It's not a brand new thing that's going on, but it's something that's growing. And with Zoom, as you know, you can have those meeting rooms on the side. So professors can still have a recording. The students can be in those meeting rooms. The professor can listen in on those meeting rooms and then create a modified lecture later in the class. So the red part here is the student involvement theory. The flipped learning is grounded in that. It believes that the more time and effort student puts into the learning experience, the greater the cognitive and personal development up here. Part of my screen is getting blocked, so I'm gonna click on that for a minute, okay. Whoops. It's a little slow transition. So why do it? Well, here, some of the theorists are saying that, well, students are used to electronic communications. This is what they do. This is how they communicate with their peers. Sometimes you'll see them in the library. They're very close to each other and they're, texting, et cetera. They just use these kind of devices throughout their day. So, this professor in Australia is saying the digital world is driving innovation and continuous change at a rapid rate. The students are ahead of some of the faculty members, and faculty members, those faculty members are trying to sort of catch up. So one of the things we learned during COVID is that the undergraduate students really want to be on campus. Now, there are many students, adults beyond the typical undergraduate age, who are really enjoying the greater opportunities for online. But in that age group, they really like the socialization that happens on campus. So campus in the US I've seen, students can't really get together and they miss that quite a bit. They don't like watching all their courses online. Well, before COVID, they were saying, oh, it's very convenient when they're there, but now they really miss that face-to-face instruction and they miss the opportunities to communicate directly with their classmates after they attended a lecture. So just quickly on the history, it really started, according to some theorists, in the state of Colorado, which is in the Southwest in the US. And there's two high school teachers, Bergman and Sams, were talking about different ways of approaching students, trying to come up with some way to accommodate the newer styles of learning. And so what they did was they just got some basic recordings of software. They added some voiceover annotations, the PowerPoint. They weren't very sophisticated pieces, but this was sort of the birth of how it all started. And obviously they succeeded. And so they went forward with it. And the people started copying it and the structure got better and better. So with the traditional lectures, we know that some students will participate a lot during it, and they're very comfortable. Some of them will just sort of ask questions to make them look really smart or try to distract the professor, et cetera. And all of you know that some students, they just go to the final exam without having spoken much during the semester. At Harvard, my advisees have always been from Eastern Europe. Most recently, Romania, Moldova, Serbia, Hungary. So they have a little discomfort because they're speaking in a second language all day, all nights, all the lectures, all the reading. And this is the first time in their life they've had to spend 24 hours a day doing that. So they don't feel comfortable at first. And it takes them a little time before they have the confidence. And then some of them think, well, it might seem strange if I suddenly sort of speak up. So there's that example. And there's also the example of some students are just more shy than others. So with inclusive teaching, it's sort of an answer to some of this. I'm quoting a theorist here who says that asking professors to be better facilitators so that they can democratize discussion, this is all sort of part of it. The professor also said students feel comfortable answering questions because of the informal atmosphere. Now, I mentioned that some students are sort of shy or not feel comfortable in a class. So you can imagine students in a very large class not feeling comfortable and how easy it is in larger classrooms to sort of hide and just sort of sit there and listen. Where with the small groups in the flipped classroom situation, they can easily feel comfortable. And it would actually be awkward not to participate. If there are 6 students or 4 students in a group, they feel they really have to say something, and they actually feel the report getting more out of the class. So it takes a little while to get up and running in flipped classroom. It's not something that you just decide, okay, I'm going to do that. But with MOOCs, actually, that's what I spoke about when I spoke at Istanbul in Istanbul, I don't know, 6 years ago. So there are more and more facilities for MOOCs and flipped classroom and distance learning, which all of you are talking about. So here in the US, Virginia Commonwealth, state in the central part of the East Coast, and again, Ohio University. Dartmouth College is considered an Ivy League college, and there's Penn State University, Notre Dame, and et cetera. They're creating facilities for faculty members. Now, on my campus, there were just a couple studios a little more than 5 years ago. And when Harvard and MIT developed edX, their MOOC, they decided they needed facilities. So they started adding on. So we went from a couple to this list of them at that time. I was involved with the design of a couple of them. One of them, the Hauser Digital Teaching and Learning Studio. We're very fortunate to have some donors give an extremely generous amount of money to build a professional grade studio. And it's staffed so the faculty members don't have to know how to do any of the technology. They go in and they have a staff that helps them create all of it. Let me see, my mouse is moving around. Okay, so the Hauser Studio, which I mentioned, this is a photograph from in that studio. And faculty members come in. In this situation, we have a technician towards the right of the screen, setting everything up. You can see that there's the screen that the professor is going to be reading from, and the professor has a graduate students there with him. So with the cameras pointing at the professor can be reading the screen, and it looks like he's having direct contact with the students, which is a nice way, of course, to teach. So PSU is Pennsylvania State University. They created what we call a one-button studio. Now, having staff in a studio is expensive. So they create this one-button thing where faculty members walk in, they have their materials ready, and they push a button. The microphones come on, the cameras come on. So obviously, it's kind of tough to do any live editing in it, but there are advantages and disadvantages to both formats. Of course, the one button, it keeps costs low, but there can be technical problems, and if you don't have staff there, it can be disruptive. And there's less of a comfort level for the faculty member there. It's also hard to add different forms of technology when you're not familiar with it. Now, in the full service studio with the technician there, you have good quality, but then the labor cost, et cetera, the final product is usually a lot better looking than the simple one button. So when setting up the course catalog, you need to have the course mechanics. You want to provide a sample recording for the students and some sample course meetings for them. Some students are familiar with this, and some students, it'll be their first time doing it. So you have 4 categories of presentation: audio recording, voiceover, screencasting, and video. You need to create an orientation module for your students. You want to have an online demonstration for them so they know how to use the technology that you're going to use in your class. And you don't want to make it too complex, not too many forms of technology. So where is the course link? Again, inform the students. You should have a technical person list the compatible device requirements here so that a student doesn't start trying to get into the course and doesn't know what's going on. Is it the network? Is it what? So they should know what devices are compatible with them. You want to let them know, of course, that not every course, if it's not flipped every time, let them know which ones are flipped, which aren't, so they don't search for a recording prior to class and wonder why there's not one there. And then how do they contact you? If you have graduate students who help you, maybe the graduate students would be the people for them to contact. So there's a link here. If you just remember Vanderbilt flipping classroom, you type that into Google, you'll come up with this site rather than having to write down the entire address here. So Vanderbilt University is a well-regarded university that's in Tennessee, which is one of the southern states. They're doing podcasts and screencasts and et cetera. They're very active with YouTube. Many universities in the US have a YouTube channel, and they're putting some of those things on there. And OpenCourseWare, et cetera. These are kind of things that they use. So how about an incentive for students to prepare for class? We know that some students come into a standard live classroom and they may or may not have read all the materials that they're supposed to read. So with this, some faculty members will do an online quiz beforehand or worksheets, maybe a short writing assignment. Again, this is all from the Vanderbilt site that you can easily find. You need a mechanism to figure out, are the students obtaining the understanding that you're hoping that they'll understand? Some faculty members will do pre-class assignments, just as evidence the students have done the work they have to do. Some of them look at class activities to focus on elements the students are struggling. The automatic grading for some things, this is something they provide. I think there's some controversy to that. And then the structures, of course, focus activities on where the students are struggling. And very often that's many faculty members don't know where the students are struggling until there's a quiz or an exam. So the final elements here is they provide in-class activities, debates, data analysis, and et cetera in there. Students can use their time there to deepen their understanding, increase their skills. I should have mentioned at the beginning that some of the items I talk about, I'm providing in more detail at first, and some will be other researchers repeating some of it. So I'll not spend as much time when we're getting to something where somebody is sort of repeating what an earlier researcher has already said. So you can see the title here. So this chart was in 2017 out of what's called the Inside Higher Ed, and Gallup is a polling group in the United States. So they talked to different faculty members about sharing the syllabus information with students. And you can see the average was 81% of faculty members who do that, and not a huge amount of variation, although the tenured track, you can see the box towards the right, 90% of them did that. And you can read the sort of the smaller segments here where they usually do it or sometimes, et cetera. Now, record and grades, you can see here, it ranges from 57% to 75%. It's interesting that the tenured faculty members provided the lowest percentage, but those trying to earn tenure had the highest percentage at 75%. So communicating with students, this would mean outside of the classroom. You can see it's about 50% of these individuals communicated with students outside the classroom. It could be via email or text or whatever. So in terms of attendance, you can see it's around a third of faculty members who do this, the highest group being those who work part-time. In the United States, some schools have what we call adjunct faculty members. There would be somebody who might teach one course and then go to another school and teach another one course. That helps them economically because they're not making a financial commitment. However, schools that provide doctorates are sending a not very positive message to graduate students. If graduate students go there and see they're putting in these years of work, and in the United States spending a lot of money, and then they see the reward is an adjunct job, those universities are really sending a bad message to the students. So doctorate granting universities shouldn't make a huge use of adjuncts. So, can they identify students who need extra help? You can see it's a small percentage here, and et cetera. So anyway, another theorist based on the advantage of flipping, the enhanced learning, going back to the theory of more time spent on learning, the more you're most likely to gain from it. It also gives the students the opportunity to learn at their pace. They can obviously pause a recording of a faculty member, they can back up and et cetera, which you can't do in the live classroom. And so the class time is spent on more effective learning activities. And as I mentioned earlier, students usually feel more comfortable participating in small groups. The faculty are working directly with the students and finding out problems early on while they can still do something about it. Okay, let's see. So, of course, there's nothing that's 100% great. Sometimes recorded lectures can be less engaging. Now, when Harvard went remote, I was in contact with my advisees. Of course, you know, we have time zones difficulties between Eastern Europe and the US, but they were telling me they felt less engaged. That just being surrounded by their classmates where everybody was involved in an activity together motivated them. And they felt they were losing motivation, but just watching online. They could get distracted by something easily, more easily than sitting there with the lecture. And you know, often the faculty member is not available during the viewing of the video. It does take time. And if you haven't done it before, it takes more time. And when you first start doing something like this, technical problems can occur. And if you don't have a technician nearby, then that'll delay you preparing it. Okay, so getting ready. The bong was just my clock, sorry. So before class, here's the activities of inquiry and collaborative. You know, it's a transfer of knowledge. Usually that happens during a live class. Here, a lot of it is happening online. It's individualized. So it's not, you know, collaborative. During class, that's when you have the scaffold engagements and you have the collaboration going on there. So after class, it's, you know, reflective. Whoops, okay, here we go. Now, there's a company in the US called Steelcase. And Steelcase builds furniture that's used in classrooms and labs and et cetera. And they've got into sharing information about their findings. Of course, they're also promoting their products. So this photograph is one that was in some of their ads. It shows a faculty member going around in a flipped classroom. And you see the faculty member speaking directly with one of the students in the group there. So this is, as the class starts off, this is how they run it. Now, you know, Steelcase gets a little strong in how they're advertising this. So they have the photo on the left, sage on the stage, as they're calling it. And they're having students sort of distracted and, you know, one falling asleep, it's there. On the right side, calling guide on the side. And the faculty member being very involved and engaged, and the students are smiling and et cetera. So they're theorizing, again, the terrible photograph in the background, you can see the students sleeping and stretched out and et cetera. A little bit of exaggeration, I think, but you know, it does happen sometimes. So they're saying here the majority of classrooms and use today were built for traditional stand and deliver, sit and listen pedagogies in a passive learning setting. And then they go over and they mention that, you know, instructors and students cannot easily leverage technology, either built in or portable, to support problem-based pedagogies and hand-on learning. So again, they're promoting their furniture, but they have a lot to say that's relevant to what's happening in some classrooms. This is a classroom in a building that was constructed around the 1740s on our campus, and it's called Harvard Hall, and Harvard Hall, room 201. So this is the traditional classroom as it was. You might be able to see that the chairs are bolted to a floor, and you can see this podium and et cetera up in the front of the room. So this is how they changed the classroom so it can be used for flipped learning. These are all faculty members in a little workshop so they can learn about how to use these devices. Every table has different faculty members. We had people from languages and sciences, literature, math, and et cetera, trying this out. I'll point out one person. If you know about Dragon Naturally Speaking, et cetera, this is Professor Paul Bamberg. He was the inventor of the voice recognition programs. Very interesting guy. Okay, here's that same classroom, but one of the problems is they made the room dark. You know, 20 years ago, when you taught in a classroom with a projector, you had to make the room sort of dark like this. This is no longer necessary. Today's bright projectors will allow you to have, you know, shades up and et cetera. So this is the way to try to, not the way to try to teach, try to have shades open. You might have a southern facing classroom where you might use filters on that one with sun coming directly in. Now, the two professors, one on our campus and one at Swarthmore College, excellent school. two faculty members who like to experiment with technology and are very often the early piece, trying out different technologies. Eric Mazur was trying some distance learning on campus, and he liked smaller classrooms, so he divided his class up, and he had one group of 20 and a group of about 30 in the other, and he would go alternate. You know, one day he'd be in the northern section of campus, and then the next day in the southern section of campus, going back and forth, so he could try distance learning and et cetera. And I think he had a lot of fun doing it. But anyway, so these two faculty members got together and they came back with reports saying that they felt students gained initial exposure prior to class, which they liked. They did use some quizzes when the students arrived just to see if they're prepared or not. They said the class time was based on mini lectures and conceptual questions, answered using clickers. Eric Mazur really likes clickers. When they first came out years ago, he was the first one on campus to try them out, and he still loves using them. So they found a large percentage of students were answering some questions incorrectly. And that's how they got through what I mentioned earlier about professors going table to table and listening, okay? And the professor providing feedback. So, principles for designing the flipped unit. Provides opportunities for students to learn the fundamental information outside of the classroom. You can introduce students to some of the basics for something and get the more complicated information in the classroom. It's not the only way to do it. There are various ways that people use flipped classrooms. And earlier we talked about not every class will be flipped, maybe. It could be for every, it might be for some. As long as the students are informed in advance, it'll work out fine. The students, you know, they're held responsible for it. That's what Eric Mazur was doing. The two professors would assess the pre-class and in-class learning, again, as others with exercises and quizzes. They would provide some well-defined instructional guidance to students during class activities. If students have never been in a flipped classroom, it'll take them a couple of class meetings to get used to this kind of format, but they usually report that they like it. And continuing on the principles, make clear connections between in-class activities and the pre-class so they understand how they're connected. Make sure that the students have enough time to complete the in-class assignments. If you have a class period of 1 hour, make sure that they have enough time to talk, and then you have enough time to gather data from listening to conversations to then provide any corrections that are necessary there. So, deciding to flip. When you first do it, you might try a few classes, see how it works out. I don't advise that or suggest that you take on one full semester and everything that's going to be flipped. If you're extremely comfortable with technology, you might possibly do it, but it's a better thing to just try it as an experiment and see how it works out before you decide that the entire semester will be flipped. It gets more comfortable and it'll build up for you. So for every hour lecture, it might take you 4 hours to record, edit, and upload a digital lecture. If your university has some technical staff to help you, it won't take you as much time because you can have them taking care of the recording, they're very familiar with it, etc. Now, once it's created, you can have the active learning exercises, and we discussed that already. So the starting point, single module or section of a course. From your experience teaching, you might know about times when students have the greatest difficulty. So you could say, okay, here's a good opportunity. I'm going to start off with this module and here, listen in the classroom, what do they understand, what they didn't, and then go on. So that's, I already talked about the next point there. Look for where they struggle. So procedural knowledge also lends itself well to the flipped format because content materials and examples and lectures can be given priority and they can be used to apply this knowledge. So there's another theory called flip. And in flip, it's a flexible environments, variety of learning modes, create flexible space design and pedagogical goals. Okay, and it's also that part of what's called the flipped learning network. And you can type that into Google and find some stuff. So the L from flipped, the learning culture shifts instruction to a learner-centered approach, where in-class activity is dedicated to exploring topics in greater depth. The I from the flipped, intentional concept to help students develop conceptual understanding as well as procedural fluency. And the P, professional educator, continually observes students and provides them with relevant feedback. Faculty I've spoken with have really had fun with the flipped classroom. Many of them enjoy having greater communications with the students. So I'm gonna go through every piece of this chart here, but it's an example of in-class activities. We're familiar with the think, pair, share sort of concepts, and that's what's happening here with the flipped classrooms. Students are think about a given question and then share it with a partner, classmates, etc. And the idea is to increase in scaffold student participation. The class discussions, students discuss topics in small, large groups. What's been found is that when they all seem to have an understanding, they quickly move on to the next topic. But sometimes they might start off with something they don't understand well. And they spend a lot of time, so a faculty member might hear that, get that data from them, that information to add to the lecture later in the class, and move the students to the next point so they can get through the various topics that you hope to have them do. And of course, it deepens their understanding from that. So I'm just going to skip down now to the rubric-based feedback. Students receive the peer feedback here using different rubrics. The students interact with rubric criteria, understanding how to improve. So it's always a better idea to have students understand their misunderstandings quickly rather than continue for several weeks in a class, basing some other understandings on the misunderstanding there. So in the United States, we have something called the American with Disabilities Act, and it requires certain things on campus and in instruction. So in campus, things such as wheelchair accessibility. In classrooms, it's called assistive listening devices. Students who have low hearing, the professor will be speaking as the professor always would with a microphone, and it goes into a system which goes to headphones to help the students who have disability in hearing. Not totally deaf, but there are other instruments for that. Here are some of the programs I'm familiar with in the United States. The bottom one I haven't used, that's why I'm sort of separating it there. So in some classrooms, if you're showing a video, you have to caption them. Harvard and MIT recently set up policies for any website they have on campus that's viewable from the outside, they are captioning it. So that if you're viewing a lecture that was recorded on campus, and you can look at it from anywhere in the world, it will be captioned. Now, accuracy is very important to them. Some of the automatic captioning devices are not highly accurate, so they use some of these programs. In a video you'll see coming up pretty soon, you'll see that I had them captioned and I used 3Play. Now 3Play was the biggest one around for quite a while, but now that they have more competition, the prices are coming down, which is great, but they are highly accurate. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little video clip here. And this fellow, Gabe Abrams, was a graduate student helping the professor in a class, and he wanted to make sure that students didn't walk into a flipped classroom and always sit with the same people. They wanted students to have to move around. So this is what he developed.
Swiping is a tool that we use for taking attendance and randomly assigning people to tables. So when students use their Harvard ID to swipe into the class, they get a point for attending, and they also get assigned to a random table so they can meet new peers and do group work.
Okay, so students walked in, and I just realized that you probably weren't hearing I'm sorry, we just pause this for a second.
So when students...
So anyway, the students walked in, they swiped their IDs, and they were assigned a table. And you can see this chart here, where the tables are all numbered in the image that they see, and they go instead of those tables. In this situation, they have these chairs, these tables rather, where you can move them and connect them with others if you wanted to have 6 people or 8 people. Right now they're sitting at 4 people there. So there's something called the Learning Glass. You can see a website there. It was developed by a professor in San Diego, California, physics professor. And he would say, you know, come check out my channel and I'll help you get through physics. So let me see if I can, there's various types here. This one is called the standalone. It's kind of hard, you know, so small. Here's what it looks like. Now we have a professor named Robert Howe. He teaches applied mathematics. And he has a course where he investigates the role of sensing in mechanical design and motor control in humans and in robots. He does a lot of robot work. Okay. So he has this introductory course in statistical methods for students in applied sciences and engineering. So here he is.
Now let me talk a little bit about the format for the class.
So he's going to talk to them about flipped classes.
So we're going to be using a flipped classroom approach. And that means we do things a little differently, maybe backwards from the way you can eventually do in a lot of math classes, which are around lectures, problem sets.
Okay, the video goes on for a while. But so anyway, he's explaining to students what a flipped classroom is. And he's using a learning glass here.
Now let me talk a little.
So here's a learning glass. It's about the size of a portable whiteboard. Here you can see that there's a technician in the back. This is, you need a what's called an HDMI flipper for this. So the professor is writing on the glass. Now ordinarily, if you had a camera going through the glass, look at the professor, all the writing would be backwards, which is of no help at all. So you connect the HDMI flipper to this learning glass and it automatically flips everything. I know that Professor Howe really loves this thing, and when faculty members see this device, they think it's just terrific. There are a number of advantages to this. So here are some of the companies that make these things, the flippers that is. Here we have some Samsungs and some Doesn't Matters on our campus. So here are the dimensions of it. It's heat-tempered PVG Starfire architectural glass. It's not very thick. You see about 1 centimeter. The glass is lit internally from the upper and lower edges by bright LEDs. So this allows the professor to maintain face-to-face contact with the students. Also, you can use a teleprompter and you can have other things ahead. So you maintain that face-to-face contact, which is so important to students. In many flipped classrooms or many distance edge classrooms, you'll see a professor writing on a chalkboard, and while writing on the chalkboard or whiteboard, the professor is not connecting directly with the students, which is unfortunate. But this glass allows you to do that. So to prepare for this, obviously you need a camera, you need text. You have to be careful about the marker and the clothing you're wearing. If I'm wearing a light blue shirt right now, if I use the white marker, it would be pretty tough to see what I was writing. So darker clothing with a lighter marker works out, or a dark marker with a light shirt works out. And you want to point from the side, not directly in front of you when you're doing this, okay? So there's a program, and I didn't play the video long enough for you to hear the Professor Howland speak about Peruzzo. And so it's a program that he and other faculty members use to order and assign textbooks. If you have some articles, PDFs, and et cetera, you can list those. They annotate the readings and asynchronously respond to each other's comments through this program. It automatically generates optional student groupings and social interactions. So it's a software program that's it's starting to be used more commonly. Now, here's this group called FL Global, or FLGI, and you can see what they're doing online, their information. They're rapidly growing. They provide some training, software, hardware, and related services for flipped classrooms. And they have projects in almost every area of the world. And so, they postulate that there's the more time in the classroom for active engagement with students, the better they're going to learn. And we talked about that theory, a little bit earlier. So right now they're in 49 countries. Well, that was 3 weeks ago. It may have changed, but that was what's going on. So another study, 80%, they found 80% of the students really liked the flipped classroom better than just the standard classroom, the professor up front, they're sitting in the room. The majority prefer the traditional lecture style for introductory courses, okay? And, about 3/4 of them perceive the classroom to be more effective. A lot of it because they had more time, direct time with the faculty members. So there's a professor who had a opposing view, and it's always good to take a look at opposing views for any topic in education. And he's saying that, good lectures build knowledge in community, they model critical civic participation, students may suffer from right via bad lecturers. Again, this is this individual's theory, and that good lecturing takes years to master. Sometimes I have discussions with my advisees, and they want to know, they'll ask, is the professor a good teacher? Which I've always thought was an interesting question for them to ask, because some professors are world renowned, and the students want to know, but can they teach? Can they understand? My wife and I are friendly a couple, and he's a Nobel Prize winner. And my wife loves listening to him talk because she says he can make the most complex topic easy to understand. Now, that's quite a skill to have. And it's quite a compliment, I think, that, to be recognized as a good teacher. So again, still quoting, the type of labor demanded in the lecture hall and the type of the community it builds still matters. That's that same professor. Under an economic system that works to accelerate and divide us, institutions that carve out time and space to facilitate collectivity and reflection are needed more than ever. So my final video clip, I'm getting near the end here. Margot Seltzer just left Harvard. She was a wonderful teacher, in addition to a great professor. She's the director of the Center for Research on Computation Society. She's been involved in software developments. She was an architect for Oracle, but she recently moved to the University of British Columbia. She was recruited to go up there. So hopefully this will work here.
Pull up the in-class work and start your assembly roulette. Going well?
Yeah, we're on round two.
Excellent. Good. If you haven't yet traded code, please try to get yourself into a mode where you can trade code with your table. And if you are looking at somebody else's assembly code and you successfully decompile it and figure out the original C, raise your hand so we can all get excited about it. Any questions? Anything you're worried about? Right, so if I called you, then I push my return value as long as I didn't jump there. But so you could argue that it's sort of ambiguous. What hasn't happened is that the callee has not gone and saved DPP.
Okay, you can see that she was doing what we were talking about. There's a very large area that was a sort of gathering area, and she asked the school to convert it into a place where she could set up. She has a large class, and even with a large class, she was successful. It's not hard, not easy to do. So you can see she had listened in different conversations. She would then broadcast some things, are you doing this? Are you checking that? And she was getting ready to do her lecture, part of it. So a few friends of mine wrote this book from the school in the Midwest, school in the South, et cetera, which I felt was quite interesting. The flipped college classroom. This is just sort of, one of the pages where it tells you about some of the topics that are going on, where they talk about flipping humanities, flipping engineering. So they get into various topics there. Here's some more topics here from their book. If you go to aect.org, and look for the bookstore, you'll find this book, you'll find a few other books. Here's another book, Flipping the College Classroom. So I'm just giving you a couple of examples. The Flipped Learning Network I talked about, flippedlearning.org. And I'll stop sharing there. So anyway, I hope I didn't put too many of you to sleep there. But I hope your time, I didn't waste your time, that you found this useful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Right now, I allow the participants to unmute themselves. So if you have any questions, you can go and ask. Değerli hocalarım, şu anda sesinizi unmute ettim. Eğer sorularınız varsa direkt sorabilirsiniz. Yeah, I think there is no questions.
Okay, can I ask them?
If you like, you can write and then I can translate it if you want.
Okay, just ask them if I spoke too quickly.
Mm-hmm.